Behind the crumbling walls of an abandoned colonial mansion, a discovery that would change everything we thought we knew about one of the wealthiest families in the region. Hidden for nearly 2 centuries, documents that reveal the true price of fortune. Contracts signed in ink, paid in blood, and sealed with human lives. What you are about to witness is not fiction. These are real testimonies, authentic records, and evidence that powerful families tried to bury forever. The question that remains is, how far did the cruelty extend to maintain power, and who truly built the fortunes that sustain some families to this day? This is the story of the Mansion of the Silent Testament, where every brick, every piece of gold, and every luxury item was acquired through unspeakable suffering. A place where wealth was measured not in currency but in human beings, where ledgers documented souls as merchandise and testaments divided people as if they were furniture. Get ready to enter a world that history books preferred to forget, a world where economic power was built on the systematic destruction of human dignity, and discover why these walls kept silent for so long. The mansion stands on what was once the most coveted piece of land in the entire province. Built in 1827, the estate sprawls across 300 acres of what used to be lush sugarcane fields. The architecture is unmistakably Portuguese colonial, with its imposing Baroque facade, tall arched windows, and a main entrance flanked by columns that seem to reach toward the heavens, as if seeking redemption for the sins committed within. The structure itself tells a story of excess. Hand-carved mahogany doors imported from Africa, marble floors brought by ship from Portugal, crystal chandeliers from France, every detail screaming wealth, refinement, sophistication. But there is something else, something that visitors in the 19th century would have noticed immediately. The sheer size of the slave quarters behind the main house, a complex of buildings that could hold over 200 human beings in conditions no animal should endure. For 173 years, this mansion changed hands among descendants of the original family, the Almeida Vasconcelos clan. Each generation maintained the silence. Each generation benefited from the fortune, and each generation added another layer of paint to cover the cracks where the truth might seep through. Then, in 2015, everything changed. The last heir, with no children and mounting debts, sold the property to a developer planning to convert it into a luxury hotel. During the renovation, workers began tearing down a false wall in what was once the patriarch's private study. Behind it, they found a hidden compartment. Inside that compartment were leather-bound ledgers, stacks of yellow documents tied with ribbon, personal letters, and an iron lockbox, containing what would become known as the Silent Testament. The construction stopped immediately. Historians were called, and what they uncovered sent shockwaves through the academic community and beyond. The ledgers were meticulous, every transaction documented with precision that would impress any modern accountant. But these were not ordinary business records. These were human inventories, page after page, listing names, ages, physical descriptions, skills, and monetary values of enslaved people, purchase dates, sale dates, deaths recorded with the same emotional detachment as one might note a broken tool. Maria, 14 years old, good for household duties, purchased for 200 milreis. José, 26, experienced in sugarcane cultivation, 350 milreis. Benedita, 9 years old, training for sewing, 120 milreis. Children. Their price is lower because they had not yet proven their capacity for labor, their futures already determined before they could speak full sentences. But the ledgers were only the beginning. The letters revealed something far more disturbing, the casual, almost bureaucratic nature with which human suffering was discussed. One letter from 1842, written by the patriarch Antonio Vasconcelos to his brother in Rio de Janeiro, reads like a livestock report. He complains about the quality of recent acquisitions from an auction. He mentions that 3 individuals died during transport from the port, reducing his expected profit. He asks his brother to secure younger specimens in the next shipment as they adapt better to the work. Specimens. That is the word he used. Not people, not human beings. Specimens. Another letter, this one from his wife Donna Mariana to her sister, discusses the punishment of an enslaved woman who dared to cry when her child was sold to a plantation 200 miles away. Donna Mariana writes with indignation, not at the separation of mother and child, but at the audacity of the woman to show emotion. She describes the whipping that followed as a necessary measure to maintain order and respect. These documents were not hidden because the family was ashamed. They were hidden because times changed, because slavery was abolished, and because the fortune these activities generated needed to be legitimized, cleaned, made respectable for future generations. The hiding was not an act of remorse, it was an act of preservation. Preservation of wealth, status, and power built on the systematic dehumanization of hundreds of people. The mansion's architecture takes on new meaning when you understand its true purpose. Those beautiful arched windows in the main house overlook the slave quarters, a deliberate design, a constant reminder of hierarchy. The masters could see their property at all times. The enslaved could see the luxury they would never experience, the comfort they built but would never enjoy. Every stone of that mansion has a story. Every gold fixture was paid for with someone's life. And now, after nearly 2 centuries, those stories are finally being told. The contracts discovered in the hidden compartment are unlike anything most historians had seen outside of official archives. These were private records, unfiltered by public scrutiny or legal sanitization. They reveal the machinery of the slave trade in its rawest form. One contract from 1834 is particularly chilling in its specificity. It details the purchase of 37 human beings from a Portuguese merchant ship that had just arrived at the port. The contract lists each person by estimated age, gender, and a physical description that reads like cattle appraisal. Strong teeth, no visible scars, good height, suitable for field work, appropriate for breeding. Breeding, the word appears in multiple contracts, because enslaved people were not just labor, they were investments that could multiply. Children born into slavery automatically became property of the master. The contracts explicitly state this, ensuring that any increase in population would be considered return on investment. The prices varied wildly based on perceived value. A young man in his prime, skilled in carpentry, could fetch 800 milreis. An elderly woman, 63 years old, was purchased for 40 milreis with a notation that she would be useful for light domestic duties until her death, expected within 3 to 5 years. Her death was calculated, planned, factored into the purchase decision. What makes these contracts particularly disturbing is the insurance clauses. Yes, enslaved people were insured like any other valuable property. One contract includes provisions for compensation if the individual dies during transport, becomes permanently disabled, or attempts escape and is killed in the process. The death of a human being reduced to a financial inconvenience, a line item to be resolved through insurance payout. But perhaps the most horrifying discovery was a series of contracts dealing with the separation of families. One document from 1847 records the sale of a woman named Joanna to a plantation owner in another province. The contract specifically notes that she is leaving behind 3 children, ages 4, 7, and 11, who will remain property of the Almeida Vasconcelos family. There is a notation in the margin, written in Antonio's handwriting: children useful for future training, mother past peak productivity, good trade. Another contract reveals the practice of what was euphemistically called breeding arrangements. The Almeida Vasconcelos family would loan strong young men to neighboring plantations for the explicit purpose of impregnating enslaved women, thereby increasing the population of both estates. The contracts outline profit-sharing agreements for any children born from these arrangements, treating human reproduction as an agricultural venture. The legal language in these documents is precise, sophisticated, thorough. These were not crude scribbles by illiterate traders. These were contracts prepared by educated men, reviewed by lawyers, witnessed by respected community members. The signature pages include names that still grace street signs and public buildings in the region. Judges, notaries, politicians, all complicit, all profiting. One contract stands out for its sheer brutality. Dated 1856, it details the purchase of 12 individuals described as a problematic lot from a plantation facing bankruptcy. The contract includes a clause allowing the buyer to return any individual who proves unmanageable, with unmanageable defined as attempting escape, refusing work orders, or displaying rebellious attitudes. The return policy for human beings. These contracts were legal. They were enforceable in courts. They were the foundation of an entire economic system that treated people as commodities, suffering as acceptable cost, and families as divisible assets. The signature of Antonio Almeida Vasconcelos appears on 73 different contracts spanning 4 decades. 73 documented transactions involving the purchase, sale, trade, or loan of human beings. And these are only the private records he kept hidden. The official records, those that went through public registries, number in the hundreds. What have you seen so far? Does this change how you view the grand mansions and historical estates that still stand today? Leave your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear your perspective on this hidden history. And down to Chapter 3, the silenced voices. Behind every contract, every ledger entry, every monetary transaction, there were human beings with names, stories, dreams, and unspeakable suffering. The discovered documents include fragments that allow us to reconstruct some of these silenced voices, to give faces to the numbers, souls to the statistics. A medical log kept by the plantation doctor reveals the true horror of daily life in the Almeida Vasconcelos estate. The entries are clinical, detached, focused solely on whether an individual could return to work. One entry from July 1841 notes that a man named Tomas, aged 32, was brought to the medical quarters with severe lacerations on his back from whipping. The treatment: salt water application, 3 days rest, return to fieldwork. No mention of the reason for the punishment, no concern for the pain, only the calculation of lost productivity. Another entry describes a woman named Esperanza, who died during childbirth at age 17. The doctor's note mentions that both mother and child were lost, representing a financial setback of approximately 400 milreis in potential future labor. That is how her death was recorded, not as a tragedy, not as a young life cut short, but as a financial loss. The medical log includes dozens of entries about children, malnutrition, dysentery, accidents in the fields despite their young age. One particularly heartbreaking entry from 1849 mentions a boy named Miguel, age 7, who lost 3 fingers in a sugarcane press. The doctor notes that the child will still be useful for lighter tasks, that the injury does not significantly diminish his future value. Among the personal letters, one stands out. It is from 1852, written by an enslaved man named Benedito to his wife Catharina, who had been sold to a plantation 300 miles away. The letter was never sent. It was confiscated and kept in the master's files, probably as evidence of literacy, which was forbidden and severely punished. The letter is brief, written in Portuguese with several spelling errors, clearly composed by someone who learned to write in secret at great risk. In it, Benedito tells Catarina that he thinks of her every moment, that he prays she is safe, that their daughter Anna, who was 6 years old when Catarina was sold, cries for her mother every night. He writes that he is trying to save money, that he is offering to work extra hours in hopes of one day buying his freedom and finding her. He ends the letter with words that echo across the centuries. I am still alive, but I am not living. Living would be holding you again. The letter was found with a notation from Antonio Vasconcelos, confiscated September 1852. Subject received 30 lashes for unauthorized literacy. Extra labor privileges revoked permanently. Benedito's dream of saving money to buy his freedom was an illusion. The financial records show that enslaved people could earn small amounts for work performed beyond their required duties, but these earnings were kept in accounts controlled by the master. The ledgers reveal that these accounts were frequently wiped clean through arbitrary fines, punishments, or simply appropriated by the family for their own use. Freedom was always just out of reach, by design. The documents include a registry of escapes. Between 1830 and 1871, 67 people attempted to escape from the Almeida Vasconcelos estate. Of these, 41 were recaptured. The registry notes their punishments: brandings, extended whippings, placement in iron collars with spikes that prevented sleeping, solitary confinement in underground chambers beneath the mansion that archaeologists have since discovered and confirmed. Of the 26 who were never recaptured, the registry assumes death in the wilderness or successful escape to quilombos, settlements of fugitive enslaved people deep in the forest. One name appears multiple times in the escape registry, a woman named Luisa. She attempted escape 4 times between 1845 and 1850. Each time she was caught. Each time the punishment escalated. The final entry notes that after her 4th attempt, she was sold to a mining operation in Minas Gerais, a sentence that was essentially death, as the average life expectancy in the mines was less than 3 years. Why did Luisa keep trying? The documents provide a clue. In one of Donna Mariana's letters to her sister, she mentions Luisa by name, complaining about her defiant spirit. She writes that Luisa refuses to accept her place, that she keeps insisting she has children in Bahia from before she was captured and transported. Luisa was not trying to escape to freedom. She was trying to escape back to her children, and for that determination she was sent to die in the mines. There are also records of resistance that took different forms. The Overseer's Diary, written by a man named Joaquim Ferreira, who managed the day-to-day operations of the plantation, includes dozens of entries about work slowdowns, tools mysteriously breaking, fires in storage buildings, small acts of sabotage that never escalated to open revolt, but created constant friction against the machinery of oppression. One entry from 1860 mentions that the entire sugarcane processing operation had to be halted because someone contaminated the grinding mechanism with stones. The overseer suspects it was deliberate but cannot identify the culprit. The punishment was collective. Reduced food rations for everyone for 2 weeks. The message was clear. Resistance would be met with communal suffering. Solidarity would be weaponized against itself. Thank you for staying with us this far. We know this content is heavy, disturbing, difficult to process, but it is essential. What you are witnessing is not just history. It is the foundation upon which wealth and power were built. And the best, if we can call it that, is still to come. The documents get even more revealing. The truth becomes even more undeniable. Stay with us. At the center of the hidden collection lies the document that gives this story its name: the Silent Testament. Written in 1867 by Antonio Almeida Vasconcelos, just 4 years before his death, this testament is a legal document that would be shocking even by the standards of the time. The testament is 43 pages long, written in elaborate script by a professional scribe, witnessed by 3 prominent citizens, and notarized by a public official. It divides Antonio's considerable estate among his 7 legitimate children and makes provisions for his wife. But what makes this document extraordinary is how it treats enslaved people not as incidental property to be distributed, but as the primary assets of his fortune. The testament begins with a preamble that reads like a business report. Antonio calculates his total wealth at approximately 2,300,000 milreis, an astronomical sum for the period. Of this total, 1,400,000 milreis, more than 60% of his wealth, is attributed to the value of the 173 enslaved people currently on his estate, plus the estimated future value of children they might produce. He then proceeds to divide these human beings among his heirs with the same careful consideration one might use to divide land or financial investments. To his eldest son, João, he bequeaths 47 individuals, specifically chosen for their skills in sugarcane cultivation and processing. To his second son, Antonio Jr., he leaves 32 people specialized in cattle management and leather work. To his daughters, he assigns domestic servants, with detailed notes about their abilities in cooking, sewing, and childcare. But the cruelty does not stop at simple division. The testament includes clauses designed to prevent these human beings from ever experiencing freedom. One clause explicitly forbids any heir from manumitting anyone received through the testament for a period of 20 years. Another clause requires that any children born to these individuals must be retained within the family for at least 15 years before they can be sold or freed. Antonio was writing this testament in 1867. Abolition was being discussed throughout Brazil. The international slave trade had been outlawed. The writing was on the wall, yet Antonio was constructing legal barriers to ensure that even after his death, even as the world changed, these people and their children would remain in bondage. The testament includes specific instructions about families. One passage divides a family of 7, sending the parents to one son, 3 children to another son, and 2 children to a daughter. Antonio notes that this distribution maximizes the value by matching skills to the specific needs of each heir's operation. The separation of this family was not an oversight. It was strategic planning. There is a section dealing with rebellious individuals. Antonio identifies 12 people by name who have displayed defiant attitudes or attempted escape. He recommends that these individuals be sold immediately upon his death to distant plantations or to the mines, removing them from the estate before they can influence others. These recommendations are framed as business advice, protecting his children from problematic assets. The testament also reveals Antonio's awareness of changing times and his contempt for abolition movements. In a lengthy paragraph, he rails against what he calls the misguided sentimentality of abolitionists who do not understand economic realities. He argues that the enslaved people under his care are better off than they would be in Africa, that the plantation provides them with food, shelter, and Christian education. He describes slavery as a civilizing force, a necessary institution that benefits both master and slave. This was not an unusual view for the time among the enslaving class, but seeing it codified in a legal testament used as justification for the deliberate separation of families and the perpetuation of bondage is chilling. Antonio believed he was doing good. He believed he was building a legacy to be proud of, and he wanted to ensure that legacy would continue long after his death. The testament includes financial projections. Antonio calculated that if his children followed his instructions, maintained the current level of productivity, and properly managed the natural increase of the enslaved population through births, the family fortune would grow to 4 million milreis within 20 years. Human reproduction as financial strategy, babies as profit centers. Near the end of the document, there is a personal note to his children. Antonio expresses pride in the empire he has built. He reminds them that everything they have, every comfort, every opportunity, comes from the careful management of this estate. He urges them to ignore the voices calling for abolition, to stand firm in their rights as property owners, to remember that their prosperity depends on maintaining control. The testament was written 4 years before Antonio's death and 8 years before the Ley du Ventre Libre, the law that freed children born to enslaved mothers. It was written 21 years before abolition. Antonio died believing his system would endure. He died believing he had secured his family's wealth for generations. He died never knowing that within 2 decades the entire legal framework supporting his fortune would collapse. But here is the darkest truth. While the legal framework collapsed, the wealth remained. The testament could not be executed as written, but the fortune it described, the fortune built on the labor and suffering of hundreds of people, that fortune was preserved, transferred, invested, and continues to exist in various forms to this day. The mansion still stands. The Almeida Vasconcelos name still appears on businesses throughout the region. The wealth that Antonio so carefully divided among his children did not disappear when slavery was abolished in 1888. It transformed. It was laundered through time, invested in new enterprises, hidden behind corporate structures, but never truly accounted for. When abolition came, the former enslavers demanded compensation, not for the people they had brutalized, but for themselves, for the loss of property. The government, fearing economic collapse and rebellion from the planter class, provided various forms of financial support, debt relief, and favorable policies. The Almeida Vasconcelos family received land grants in new territories, access to low-interest credit for transitioning to paid labor, and political positions that allowed them to shape labor laws in their favor. Meanwhile, the 173 people who were enslaved on the estate received nothing, no land, no compensation for generations of unpaid labor, no education to prepare them for life as free citizens, no legal recourse for the crimes committed against them and their ancestors. They were simply released into a society that had no place for them, where the only jobs available were on the same plantations where they had been enslaved, now for wages so low they could barely survive. The descendants of Antonio followed his business acumen. They transitioned from sugarcane to coffee, from coffee to cattle ranching, from agriculture to urban real estate as the country industrialized. Each transition preserved and grew the original wealth. The fortune built on slavery was never dismantled. It was simply reinvested. Today, the Almeida Vasconcelos family includes doctors, lawyers, politicians, and business executives. They sit on boards of cultural institutions, they donate to charities, they are respected members of society, and most of them have no idea where their comfort truly originates. Or perhaps some do know and simply choose not to acknowledge it. The documents discovered in that hidden compartment tell a story that extends far beyond one family. They reveal a systematic economic structure that extracted wealth from human suffering and created inequalities that persist to this day. The neighborhoods where descendants of enslaved people live tend to have fewer resources, worse infrastructure, limited access to quality education and health care. This is not coincidence. This is the direct result of starting from nothing, while others started with fortunes built on stolen labor. Studies have shown that families who owned enslaved people in the 19th century still have, on average, significantly higher wealth than families who did not. The advantage compounds over generations through inheritance, access to better education, business networks, and social capital. The disadvantage also compounds, creating cycles of poverty that are incredibly difficult to break. The mansion itself is now a museum. After the discovery of the documents, the developer abandoned the hotel project. Instead, working with historians and community leaders, particularly descendants of the people who were enslaved there, they created an educational space. The rooms where Antonio and his family lived in luxury now display the contracts, the ledgers, the letters. The slave quarters have been preserved and open to visitors, showing the stark contrast in living conditions. In the basement, they uncovered the punishment cells mentioned in the overseer's diary, small spaces, barely large enough for a person to lie down, completely dark, where people were held in isolation for days or weeks. On the walls, archaeologists found scratches, marks, attempts by imprisoned people to keep track of time, to leave some evidence of their existence. These marks are now protected, displayed, honored as the testimonies they are. The museum includes a memorial wall with the names of every person identified in the documents, 173 names from the final census before abolition. Dozens more from earlier records, names that were almost lost to history, reduced to numbers in ledgers, but are now spoken again, remembered, honored. But museums are not enough. Documentation is not enough. The truth is that this wealth was stolen. It was built through crimes against humanity, and those crimes created advantages and disadvantages that continue to shape society. The question that remains is, what responsibility do we have to address this? What does justice look like when the crimes happened generations ago, but the consequences remain? Some argue for reparations, direct financial compensation to descendants of enslaved people. Others advocate for massive investment in education, healthcare, and infrastructure in communities that have been systematically disadvantaged. Some call for land redistribution, recognizing that the estates built on slavery should belong to the descendants of those who actually worked that land. These are difficult conversations. They challenge comfortable narratives. They force us to acknowledge that prosperity and poverty are not simply the result of individual effort, but are deeply connected to historical injustices that were never properly addressed. The Mansion of the Silent Testament stands as a reminder that silence is complicity, that hidden documents reveal truths that powerful people wanted to bury, that every fortune has an origin story, and some of those stories are written in blood. What do you think should happen with wealth built on slavery? How do we address historical injustices whose effects still shape our world? Share your thoughts in the comments below. This conversation needs all of our voices. If this investigation opened your eyes to hidden histories, subscribe to this channel. We are committed to uncovering the truths that were deliberately erased, to giving voice to the silenced, to showing that history is not a distant abstraction, but a living force that shapes our present. And when you are done reflecting on what you have seen here, watch the next recommended video where we explore another mansion, another family, and more secrets buried beneath the facade of respectability. History remembers when we refuse to forget.